In this video, I'm going to talk about actually how to use Automatic1111, assuming that you've already got it installed and it's up and running. If you don't, check out the previous video. I'll link in the comments. I've also got a video before that as well, which just talks about the actual technology and how it all works. So once this is running on your local machine, obviously the first thing you want to do is just type in any old prompt and hit generate, make sure that you're actually getting output and it's working. So let's have a look at the first drop-down box at the top here that's called Stable Diffusion Checkpoint. This is referred to as a checkpoint, but it's basically the model. Model checkpoint is the same thing, just different terminology. I've got quite a few listed, but out of the box you'll only have 1.5. So if you do want to download different ones, they allow you to generate images of a different style. They're effectively just tweaked and merged and fine-tuned, and there's a lot of community resources out there for various different models. One of the best websites is civitai.com. If you list this by highest rated and all time, you'll find some really good ones on here. Deliberate seems to be the most popular. I use this as my go-to. It's a really great all-rounder. You can do a lot with this model. The other good thing about this is that it's relatively small in size. So I think the base model for Stable Diffusion, the one that comes out of the box, 1.5, is around about 4 gigabytes. If you've got a very limited amount of VRAM on your graphics card and you've only got 4 gigabytes, then it might be worth looking at something like Deliberate because it's only 2 gigabytes in size. And just to explain, when you use these models, they're loaded into your VRAM, so they're loaded into memory in full. Don't know why this is taking forever. Let me refresh the page. Maybe it's my connection that's playing up at the moment. Or maybe Civitai is down. That would be good. So let's leave that loading. In the meantime, I'll just talk about some of the other things on this first interface. So the text prompt is fairly self-explanatory. Obviously, you just type in what you want. You'll get used to how to word things. It's not always necessarily going to be in a sort of human readable sentence, but you might put certain things in that format. You can stick in a comma and put other things like a green hat. I'm repeating the word hat, but I'm trying to say, trying to announce that this is exactly what I want. So we've got an oversized green hat on this one. Oops. Or I could change that to a blue hat. Directly below that, you've got the negative prompt. So this is all the things you don't want. In this case, I'm specifying styles. So 3D render, cartoon, painting, just so that I'm more likely to get a photorealistic image. You can use these in tandem. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So I might also put photorealistic in my, in my prompt, and then I'm even more likely to get a photorealistic image. But I found I don't really need to do that as long as I've got these negative prompts. So there's use cases for these, and it's just a lot of playing around. The other good thing about Civitai, now it looks like it's loaded. Let's just try this again. As well as there being tons and tons of resources on here, when you do click on these models and go into them, when it eventually loads, don't know why it's taking so long, but there's a lot of demo sample images from the people that have uploaded them, but also from the community for what people have made with them. You can click onto those images and find all of the different settings and prompts that were used in the generation, which is really handy, and it's a good way to understand how to actually communicate with the model and make it produce what you want it to produce. Typically, the website doesn't work when I want to do the tutorial. Excellent. There we go. Something's happening. Okay, so we've got the Rev animated model here. You can click download. Some of these, like I say, are quite big, some are quite small. If I go into deliberate, this is only 2 gigabytes. Download it, and where you want to put it is in your Stable Diffusion Web UI folder. You should have a folder for models. If you go into there, you'll have another folder for Stable Diffusion, and you want to drop all your models in here. They'll either be .ckpt or .safetensors. Once you've done that, if you hit the refresh button, they will show up in the list and you can switch between them. Word of warning, it can take a little while just to switch because what's happening is it's loading that whole model into memory. So that's why if you have a smaller model like Deliberate, which is only 2 gig, and if you've only got 4 gig of memory on your graphics card, this might be an ideal one for you. The other thing that you want to check in here is the base model. So for this one, it's based on 1.5. 1.5 is the out-of-the-box model, but you also need to make sure any models that you download have the base model that you have installed. Otherwise, I think there'll be problems with it working. But they're all effectively based on that initial 1.5 model. They're just refined or merged with others or tweaked in certain ways. But as I was saying, there's plenty of samples on here. You can click on those and you can find all the different settings. So for this one, I'm just going to take the prompt and stick it in here. Take the negative prompt, whoops, and stick that in here. 24 steps, 8 CFG, and we've got a seed. And I'll explain all of these things in a short moment. So 24 steps, 8 CFG, and we'll put the seed number in. We'll hit generate. I'm expecting to get a similar image, but not the same image. There's various different reasons for that. One of them might be just simply hardware. The other one might be configuration settings. There's a thing called Xformers, which some people use, and that tends to change things a little bit. But you can see it's pretty close. Not a million miles away, but still quite different at the same time. So the text prompt is fairly self-explanatory. As I say, you can come on here and find a lot of good, good methods of getting certain lighting effects and that sort of thing. There's also this format, which is emphasis. So let's just go back to a simple prompt, a cat in a hat. We'll just put some of these settings back. I'm going to put a random seed and hit generate. So let's say I wanted my cat in a hat to have big eyes. I can type in big eyes in my prompt, but that's only going to get me so far. It might have slightly bigger eyes, which it does in this case, but sometimes I'll hit generate and it might not be that much bigger. In these cases, it's doing quite well. But let's say we want to emphasize it and make it even bigger. I want bigger eyes, but I don't want to have to keep adding words like enormous and gigantic. And so I can wrap the whole thing with brackets, put a colon in there, and then give a percent as a decimal. So 0.5 for 50% bigger eyes. And yet we have slightly bigger eyes than what you would expect it to be normally. Let's put that up to 100%. Not a vast difference, that kind of looks normal to me, but let's just keep pushing it a little bit further. 120%. Now we can start to see that's definitely not a normal size. And we can push it further still, but there's definitely a limit to where this will go because you'll start getting artifacts and it'll go all weird and bizarre like it has done here. So there's a lot of trial and error to get these things right, but as long as you understand the concepts of how to add emphasis, that's the main thing, and you can then play about with it from there. So I've got the sampling method. Now I did briefly touch on this in the explanation of how Stable Diffusion works, but there's a really good graphic on Reddit that I found which shows some of the different samplers and the different ways that they remove noise over the steps. So most of them end up with the same result. There's some that produce different output, but this is really easy to play about with. Unlike the models, it doesn't take time to change between these, so you can just click a different one, hit generate, and away you go. So the width and the height. I think I mentioned in the earlier video as well that the training data for the 1.5 model was all based on 512 by 512 images. This is quite important. For the version 2, that was 768 by 768, so slightly larger. But what it means is if you try and start pushing these up, so 1024 by 1024, because you want a bigger image, first of all, it's going to consume more RAM. So if you don't have a lot of RAM, you'll probably get an error message in your console that'll say CUDA out of memory error. The second problem with this is because of that training data, it's not used to these 124 by 124 images, and you'll start getting artifacts, and they manifest themselves in duplication. So we might see it here, but I'm expecting to see a lot of duplicate cats, maybe duplicate eyes, but we'll see. Obviously, it's taking longer because the image is bigger. So there we've got quite a lot of weirdness and artifacts going on. So how can we fix this and create a big image? Well, there's many different ways in which you can upscale, but typically you always want to leave these as they are. And I'll go into upscaling in a brief moment. There's a few different methods that I'm going to show where you can upscale an image quite nicely to 4K and have this very crystal clear, highly detailed image. Batch count allows you to obviously do more images in one pass. So let's just go back to the simple prompt of a cat in a hat, and we'll change the sampler. Just another thing to mention actually about the sampler is you'll find that this one is likely your favorite. It's the most popular one, at least. It's the one that I always go to. I do sometimes play about with the others, but this one is the most sort of favored one out there, I think. At least on all of the samples, you'll see it's quite often used. So I'm just going to hit generate and show you what the batch generation looks like. So it'll generate 5 different images, obviously show them one by one as they're generating. It will also generate a grid with all of the images stuck together so you can see them side by side, which is really useful. Another thing actually while this is happening that I've not mentioned yet, every single time that you hit generate, it's actually saving all of those images. So if you go into your Stable Diffusion folder, there's a folder in here for outputs, and there is a text to image folder because we're in the text to image tab, and then it will list it by date. So if I jump into here, you can see all of the outputs that I've done today. Now the really handy thing about this is that let's say I generated this days ago and I've forgotten what I typed in to get, but I really like this image and I want to upscale it, or I want to tweak it and play about with it. I can absolutely still do that, and I don't need to worry about how I made it because it's all saved within the metadata of the image. So if I right click this and go to edit, nope, that's not what I wanted. Right click it and go with open with and notepad. So we can see that metadata there. So we can see all those settings along with the binary data for the image. And what that means is we can use this PNG info tab and we can drag and drop any image into here and it will pull all that metadata through, which means we can click send to text to image. So if I hit generate now, I should get this exact image again. Oops, I've got the batch count on, so it's going to generate 5, but let me interrupt that and hit generate. There we go. So we've got that same image back again, and we can work with it from there. So the CFG scale, if you hover over any of these labels, by the way, it gives you a description, but this is essentially how close the prompt is conformed to. So if I lower this right down to 1, it's going to not listen to my prompt, or at least not listen to it as much. I'm still going to get a cat in a hat, kind of, but now I've got this really weird looking fluff ball, but as a sort of painting style, which I specified I didn't want a painting here. So it's definitely not listening to that. So it'll give it a lot more room for deviation from that prompt. Oops, I've got a fixed seed. Likewise, if I stick it up to full, it's going to listen to the prompt as much as it can. But that's going to also produce some weird results and artifacts. So there's certainly a sweet spot with this as well, which is typically 7. That's the default setting. But there's use cases for tweaking this about. So the seed is actually the seed of random noise generation. So where I mentioned in my first video about how Stable Diffusion works is we've got this completely random Gaussian noise, and then noise is taken away over time to get to an image like we've got here. So the seed is the generation value for that noise. And it means that we can use that to get back to the same image. So the little roll of a dice button will put a -1 into this box, which means you'll have a random seed. If you click this, it will use the last seed it used to generate an image. So this one that we've got here. So if I hit generate, I'm just expecting to get exactly the same image back again. So that's pretty much how to use text to image. Now there is image to image, which is very, very similar. In fact, we can send these to image. It's very similar. However, it just provides you with a input box for an image. So I can provide both a text prompt and an image, and it's going to take both of those things and produce an output based on both of those combined. So if I just hit, I'll leave all the default options here, but let's just hit generate and see what it produces. So I'm expecting a cat in a hat. In this case, I've got a very, very similar cat in a hat, but there is subtle differences in this image. I think mainly in lighting. I can see definitely more reflection within the eye than I've got here, more of a round, whereas this one's more broken. There's a little bit of dust here, whereas on this image there's a little bit of dust here, and there's also an indentation in the hat. So not a massive difference, but it's a variation of what I've input. And there's a lot of ways that we can tweak this and play about with it. For example, here we've got an extra setting that we didn't have in the other text to image tab, and this is called denoising strength. And what this is how closely it conforms to the text, to the image input. So if I stick this down to 0 and hit generate, we'll just put a random seed on as well. Generate, and you can see it's exactly the same image. That dust speck is in the same spot, the eye looks the same, exactly the same, because I'm telling it to conform to the input image. If I stick this up to 1, I'm expecting to get a pretty unrelated image. It's going to take the context of my prompt and the context of what's in the image, but it's going to have a lot more deviation on what it's allowed to do. So you can see there's certain similarities. It's a similar type of cat, similar type of black hat, but we've definitely got that deviation. So it's a really great way of generating variations of a particular image that you want, or even just changing the style. You could do a kind of hat as a painting. And now we've got that same sort of cat, but as a painting. So there's a lot that you can do with this. But the sweet spot for this is typically around about 7. If you want it to deviate quite a bit, but not too much. In fact, yeah, let's do a kind of hat as a painting. So we're going to get those features from that original image, but we have that painting effect at the same time. Now, I think the next thing I'll show is actually how to upscale these images because that's really useful. So let's say let's go back to the folder that we generated. Let's say we want to upscale this one. I like this picture. I want to make it crystal clear because if I zoom in onto this, you can start seeing pixels pretty fast. So let's take that and we'll just drop it into image to image. Now this is where we can get into extensions. This is really cool because there's lots of community support and there's lots of extensions available for this. So you want to come into this tab, click on available, click load, and you'll have all the extensions listed and searchable. If you hit the search box and type in Ultimate, you should find this one, Ultimate SD Upscale, and just hit the install button on the right. I've already got it installed, but it might prompt you to restart the web UI. When you do, what you'll have available to you in the script field here is this Ultimate SD Upscale. Now, before where I mentioned if you start changing the width and height, that will produce weird artifacts and you won't get what you want. Whereas the Ultimate SD Upscale, what it does is it lets you modify these settings. It will take the width and height that you asked for, but it will break the image up into smaller portions and upscale them a piece at a time so that it uses less VRAM and it also then stitches them all back together at the end. So we can, for example, let's just double the size of it up to 1024 by 1024. We'll say a denoising strength of about halfway because I don't want it to deviate too much from the original that we've got. We'll take out as a painting. We'll just have a cat in a hat, highly detailed, put 4K, we'll put 8K, just try and draw out the additional detail that's missing when it starts to upscale. And that's it, I think. So let's hit generate. So another thing to know, all these images are not going to be in the image to image folder. They're going to be in, sorry, not in the text to image folder. They're going to be the image to image folder. So if I just jump back to outputs, we want to be in the image to image folder. And you can see all the stuff that I've been working on is saved here. And we've just got our output image saved as well. So if I double click on this, I can already see this is a much bigger image. Let's just put this over here. Let me just extend it a bit and we'll get the original and we'll just compare side by side. So I think, oops, I've lost it now. There we go. So that's as big as that one will go. So you can already see it's double in size. As I zoom in on the eyes, we've got all these pixels. I can zoom in on the eye here, and it's a much more clearer image. But I want to make this, even higher detail. I want it maybe a 4K image. And we do have some variation, which is that denoising strength, but I'm fine with that. It's not too far from the original, so yeah, it's not a problem. So let's take this image here, and I'll just show you another way of upscaling again. This one is send to extras. So we've got our 1024 by 1024, and we can scale by and then specify the amount of times to scale it up by. So in this case, I'm going to go with 4. I'm going to choose my upscaler. This is actually a custom one that I've downloaded, but I'll post a link to that in the comments. So it takes a little while, just showing a little loading symbol. In your outputs folder, the extras tab actually saves into extras images. So I've got some, while that's, oh, it's already finished, that was quick. It is actually quite fast. Here's another one I was working on the other day. Elton John with a little fit bunny on a treadmill. So we've got this image now and we are at 21 megabytes. So you can see it's quite large in size as a PNG and the properties are 4K by 4K. So the JPEG is 1.17 meg. But you can see, much more clarity and detail in that image from the hair right the way into the eyes as you zoom in. And people do this with some really, really great images. They upscale to like 4 or 8K and um, really bring out all that extra detail. One of the ones that I saw recently on Reddit was this image. Looks really cool. When you zoom in, there is quite a lot of graininess, but I think in a way that adds to the atmosphere of the picture. So that's upscaling. Another good feature, which is also part of the image to image tab, is called inpainting. And this is really, really good. If you generate, let's say, a bunch of images, you've got something in your mind that you want to create, you might keep getting things that are close, but there's something not quite right with it. So you generate the image again, but that could potentially take a long, long time to get to where you want to be, because maybe the thing that wasn't quite right is now fixed, but there's something else wrong with the image or something missing with the image. So what we can do is we can mask certain areas of an image and inpaint. So for example, if I just take this image and send it to a copy image to inpaint, I've now got a brush on the canvas and I can just increase the brush size. I can mask certain aspects of it. So let's say the eyes. You don't have to be, exactly perfect. Um, it's an AI after all, it will work out how it needs to blend these images once it generates them again. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove the prompt and we're going to type in blue cat eyes. Probably not very realistic because how many deep blue cat eyes do you see? But let's have a look what comes out. So we're going to change the inpaint area to only masked. I'm going to put the denoising strength up to 70%. And I'm going to turn off the upscale that I turned on earlier. So let's just hit generate and we'll see what happens. It's taken a little while, but bearing in mind this is on the 1024 by 1024 image. So we've got some unusual looking blue eyes there. But what you might want to do is just put the batch count up, do a few generations. Oops, that's probably why it's taking forever. So let's just go into the outputs and go into the image to image folder again. And we'll look at these generations that it's produced. So you can see each one is slightly different in the way that it's blended, in the size and the proportions of the eyes and the color. But it just allows you to make those changes and then pick out the best one. And there's a lot that you can do with this. It's really, really powerful. So I think in one of the early pictures I did, and I might even have the example here still. Let's have a look. Yep, so I took this image, which was a football in a field. I masked the football. And essentially turned it into a plant pot. And it blended really well with the grass, like it was sat there. So one of the next things that I want to show off is an extension called ControlNet, and this is really, really powerful. So let me just jump into extensions. So from the available list, you want to type in ControlNet, and you're looking for There we go, SD-WebUI-ControlNet. Make sure that one's installed. Now there is actually some specific models that you need to download for this to work, but I'll link those in the comments. When you've got that installed and you've restarted the WebUI, you'll have this additional tab here which you don't normally have that says ControlNet. And this allows you just to take an image. So I'll just take one from my desktop that I've got of a guy holding a football, and I could say a Viking holding a football in my prompt. Let me do a random seed. We'll turn ControlNet on. Now there's many different methods to use ControlNet. One of the most popular ones is called OpenPose. So I'm going to select that one and just show that one in this video. But effectively what it's going to do is it's going to scan this source image. It's going to understand the pose of the individual and create a skeleton for it, and then apply that to the output image that I'm creating. So everything else I can leave default, and if I just hit generate, I'm expecting to get a Viking holding a football in this pose. Now it's going to take a little while because I've not used ControlNet up to this point, so it's got to load that model in. So I can see that happening in the actual control window, command prompt window, and now it started generating the image. So you can see I've got this arm down with the hand wrapped around, and then this arm up with the hand sort of twisted in the same fashion. Football's in the opposite hand, but the fact is the pose is the same. And this is really powerful, especially with video and animation, which is where some people are taking this. So effectively what they're going to do is video themselves doing a certain action, maybe walking down a street, and then that video will be split into all its respective frames. Those images can be fed into image to image through the batch tab. And in ControlNet, you can use OpenPose and also use the batch tab. So you can really basically just take all the input images and the pose from them and apply that to the output. So you could build up a new sequence of images, stitch them all together, and produce a video based on the original input video. But obviously it'll be completely transformed into whatever style or text prompt that you've asked for. So that can be really powerful. The only downside with that is an issue called temporal stability, which people are actively working on. And what that means is because these are just image generations and everything is, every one image to the next in your video will be slightly different, whether it's the lighting, whether it's the color intensity, whether it's certain proportions. So you get this sort of flickering effect. So it works, you've got that same pose, you've got that animation, but there's a weirdness to it of that flickering and instability, and it doesn't conform throughout. So there's a lot of solutions around that people are working on. One of those at the moment is actually called EbSynth, which I've used and I've played about with. Let me just quickly jump into that. So if you download this, it's absolutely free to use. It comes with a out-of-the-box demo, which is a small 2-second clip or 3-second clip of a bobcat. This is just to highlight how it works. But effectively, you take all those images from that original video. So you split them out into images, and then let's just say for argument's sake, I've already fed those through Stable Diffusion and I've got something like this as a painting version. In this case, they all look the same. They all are actually perfect. But in Stable Diffusion, you might have slight variations in these images from one to the next with lighting, with color, with proportions. So this is the output that you've got from Stable Diffusion. You can take this, pass it into EbSynth, and it will process that and try and make everything conform and smooth it all out. So you might end up with a video like this. And that's the idea anyway. And some people have done some really, really cool things with that. A really good resource for it is Reddit. So the Stable Diffusion subreddit. There's some really good stuff on here. And usually just go top this week. So this one I believe was using ControlNet. I think he had a problem with the mouth, and he ended up masking it out. So it's his own mouth, his own teeth and what have you. But everything else is produced by Stable Diffusion. And then towards the end of the video, he actually splits it so you can see what he looks like in reality. So there's not too much, variation. It's taken his facial structure, but he's obviously aged himself up quite a lot. So that's how to use ControlNet in a nutshell. As I say, there's lots and lots of different not sampling methods. There's lots of different ControlNet methods. OpenPose is just one of the most common ones, but there's loads of different things in here. Another cool one is Scribble. That literally allows you just to scribble. So you could take a very crude drawing in Paint, MS Paint, and then pass it into that, and it will take the composition of that image and apply it to the output. So a good example of that, which I found on Reddit, is this image. Someone's done a very crude paint drawing and then turned it into this pretty cool looking render. So it's really, really powerful. The other thing that I've not mentioned yet is embeddings and textual inversion and training in general, really. There's a lot of different types of resources. So if you come onto Civitai and have a look in the filter, you'll see that there is checkpoint files, there is textual inversion or embeddings, there's hypernetworks, there's LoRa's, Lycoris, and these are all different types of models, really. Textual inversion is a really light touch way of training data, and I've actually done this with my cat and myself. Let me just show you an example. Let me just turn off some of these settings. ControlNet. Right, so if I do my cat, now it has to be something unique, which is why it's got this pancake cat word. My cat is called pancakes, but if I use that, I just have lots of pictures of pancakes. So it's got to be something it doesn't understand, it doesn't know, and then I can train the data and create this embedding file. The embedding files are really, really small, and they go into the Stable Diffusion and embeddings folder. So this one that I'm going to use is only 31 kilobytes in size, which is nothing really. So if I type in a photo of Pancake Cat, I should get something that looks similar to my cat. I'm not expecting it to look exactly like lifelike because I'm using a custom model here. So this has definitely got some features of my cat, but doesn't really resemble her that much. And that's just due to the model bias that I've got. But it's a really good way of being able to use this training data with different models. And you just trigger it by sticking it in the text prompt. So if you see these textual inversions, that's how you would effectively use them. You might get ones for individuals, certain people, or you might get them for styles. So this is a specific style. I think the website's struggling today. It's doesn't want to seem to load. But out of the box with Automatic1111, you can go into the Train tab and you can create embeddings in here. Now there is a whole process around this. It's probably another video for another day, but I have actually written an article and I'll link that in the comments as well. And there's some really good YouTube videos and tutorials out there for it. It's a lot lighter touch, so you only need a handful of images. Like I say, the file is really small in size, so it's not like having to download an entire model, which might be about 4 or 5 gigabytes. I haven't really looked at hypernetworks or LoRa's yet, but that's again another different method. And I think that's about it. There is some really cool extensions out there. There's one for inspiration that I've got, which you just click get inspiration and it pulls some random artists, and you can sort of use these in your prompts to get that similar style. There's one called Civitai Helper, which basically scans all of the models that you have. So if you're using this little button here, you can go into your checkpoints folder and it pulls thumbnails for the models, which is really helpful in my opinion, because I used to just use this list and I kind of forgot, what models did what without having to look them up on Civitai. So this just provides a very visual way to see some samples without having to switch over to the Civitai website. And you can click on these and it will load it straight in. But there's lots and lots of different extensions. There's some really fun ones, like there's text to video, which was really a proof of concept. This was actually trained fully on Shutterstock images, as far as I'm aware, because at least as far as I've seen, everything that's output from this will have a very mangled Shutterstock logo on it. So there's some questionable copyright issues there, which I'm sure are currently being debated. But as a proof of concept, it's really cool in that you can just type in a text prompt and produce a video. And there's some really nightmarish fuel videos from, Will Smith eating spaghetti to The Rock eating rocks, Donald Trump playing around in mud. There's some all sorts of weird stuff getting posted into Reddit. And it's going to be really interesting to see where that stuff goes as the temporal stability issues are fixed and these things get more, you know, highly detailed and easier to work with and more accessible to people. And that's really everything that I wanted to show. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out, drop me a message, or if you have any trouble doing anything, let me know and I'll try and help where I can.